The street was calm. The sun was dipping behind the buildings, painting the sky with soft shades of red, orange, and gold. A cool breeze moved through the trees, carrying the smell of fresh food from the nearby restaurant. The sound of distant laughter and cars passing by made everything feel normal. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening. A black family walked slowly along the sidewalk, heading back to their car. The father, tall and broad-shouldered, carried a small paper bag from the restaurant. The mother walked beside him, holding the hands of their two children, a boy and a girl. Both under 10, the kids were still giggling about dessert. "Daddy, next time, can I get to Scoops?" the boy asked, swinging his small backpack back and forth. The father chuckled softly. "One scoop is enough. Otherwise, you'll be bouncing off the walls all night." The mother smiled, adjusting her coat as the evening breeze picked up. "Come on, you two. We have school tomorrow. Let's get home." The family crossed the parking lot, the sound of their footsteps blending with the soft hum of cars in the distance. Everything felt ordinary, but in a split second, the calm shattered. Two police cars screeched into the lot, sirens blaring and red-blue lights flashing. Tires screeched loudly against the pavement, making the kids flinch. The laughter stopped. The first car stopped only a few feet away from the family. Doors slammed. Two uniformed officers jumped out, their hands already hovering near their holsters. The taller one barked, "Stop. Stay right where you are." The father froze immediately. He gently moved his kids behind him, his face calm, but his jaw tight. The mother's hand instinctively gripped her daughter's shoulder, pulling her close. The second officer shouted, his voice sharp, "Hands where we can see them. Now." The kids' eyes went wide. The little girl whispered, "Mommy, what's happening?" The mother's lips trembled as she whispered back, "It's okay, baby. It's okay." But it didn't feel okay. People nearby turned to watch. A couple walking out of the restaurant stopped at the doorway. A man getting into his car paused, pulling out his phone to record. Quiet tension settled over the parking lot, the kind that makes your chest feel heavy. The father slowly raised his hands. His voice was calm, but steady. "Officers, is there a problem? My kids are scared." The taller officer stepped closer, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim light. "It's got a report of suspicious individuals near the store. You fit the description?" The father frowned slightly. "Just had dinner, that's all." His words were quiet but clear. The shorter officer looked past him at the mother and kids. "Ma'am, step back, everyone against the wall now."
Ow.
Little girl started crying softly. The boy held his sister's hand tight, his small shoulders trembling. The mother pulled them close, glaring at the officers through tears in her eyes. The father stayed still. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. Instead, he took a deep breath, his eyes calm but sharp, as if he knew something the officers didn't. More people began to gather at the edge of the lot. Phones were up, recording every second. Murmurs filled the air. Why are they stopping them? They didn't do anything. This doesn't look right. The officers didn't care. "Sir, turn around. Hands on the car. The tall officer ordered." The father tilted his head slightly, his calmness almost strange. "Officer, I think you should double-check your report before you continue." The taller officer frowned. "Excuse me, are you giving me orders now?" His hand hovered closer to his weapon. The mother gasped softly, pulling her kids closer. The father didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the officer. "No, sir, I'm giving you a chance to avoid a very big mistake," the crowd murmured. Louder now, sensing something unusual about the father's tone, the officers didn't back down. The shorter one snapped, "Sir, last warning, against the car, or we detain you and your family right now." The father lowered his hands slowly, glancing at his watch. He whispered, just loud enough for his wife to hear, "Not yet. Wait." The mother's eyes widened in confusion. "What do you mean, wait?" she whispered back. The father didn't answer. He just gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then he looked back at the officers, his voice calm again. "Are you sure this is how you want to handle this?" The taller officer scoffed. "And who exactly do you think you are to question us?" He smirked. You're just a civilian. So, no, we don't need your advice. The father's lips curved into the faintest smile. You're right, I am a civilian right now, but you might want to know who I was. Before I took this family to dinner, the officers glanced at each other, confused. Before they could respond, the father slowly reached for his phone. Sir, keep your hands where we can see them. The shorter cop barked, stepping forward, hand gripping his holster. The father froze for a moment, then spoke slowly. Making one call, and trust me, you'll want me to. The taller officer laughed harshly. Yeah, to who? Your lawyer. He shook his head. You're not walking out of here without a search? The father's expression didn't change. He pressed a single button on his phone. The line rang once, then connected. He spoke clearly, his voice low but powerful. This is Colonel Jackson. I'm being detained without cause. Location sent. The taller officer froze mid-step. Colonel, the entire parking lot went quiet. The crowd stopped whispering. Even the mother turned to her husband, eyes wide with surprise. The kids didn't fully understand, but they could feel the tension shift. The father calmly put the phone down. Then he looked back at the two officers, his eyes steady. You still want my hands on the car? The officers exchanged glances, suddenly unsure. The taller one swallowed hard, his voice quieter now. Who, exactly, did you just call? The father didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the dark sky. A faint sound, so faint it was easy to miss at first, began to hum in the distance. It was growing louder, sound of heavy rotors cutting through the air. The crowd turned, looking up. The officers stiffened, suddenly pale. Is that helicopter? The shorter one whispered. The father's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then said softly, almost to himself, They're here. The mother looked at him, shocked. The kids clutched her coat, their fear turning into confusion. The people watching whispered louder, filming everything. The father finally lowered his hands. He turned his calm eyes back on the two officers. Now, let's see if you still think we're suspicious. Above them, the hum of the rotors grew louder, closer. The quiet evening was gone. Something far bigger was about to unfold. The red and blue lights painted the parking lot in sharp, blinding flashes. Every few seconds, the world seemed to turn into a frozen photograph. Faces lit up. Shadows stretched across the pavement, fear etched on everyone's faces. The taller officer's voice boomed again. Sir, I said, turn around. On the car now. Colonel Jackson stood tall, his face calm, his kids still behind him. The boy whispered, clutching his sister's arm. Daddy, why are they so angry? Did we do something? The father looked down at his son for a brief second, his voice steady. No, son. We didn't do anything wrong. His eyes stayed on the officers, never blinking. But sometimes, people don't need a reason to treat you like this. The mother's heart raced. She could feel her hands trembling as she tried to keep her kids close. She had seen videos like this online, families surrounded, things escalating for no reason, and everything going wrong in seconds. Her eyes darted to the phones, recording them. If things went bad, would anyone step in? Or just film? The shorter officer moved closer, his hand resting firmly on his holster. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, but laced with threat. Listen, I don't care if your kids are watching. I don't care if all these people are recording. You're going to follow orders, or you're going in cuffs. Do you understand? The father tilted his head slightly, studying the officer like he was measuring every word, every movement. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he spoke with a strange calmness, a tone that didn't match the chaos around him. Officer, you're making a mistake you can't take back. Are you sure you want to do this? The taller cop barked out a bitter laugh. No, we're making a mistake. That's Rich. You think you're special or something? He gestured sharply with his hand, turn around. The boy whimpered softly, his grip tightening on his mother's coat. The little girl buried her face in her mother's side. The mother could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. The crowd watching was growing larger. Some were whispering to each other. One man muttered, "This is ridiculous. They're not even resisting." Another voice, a woman, said, "Why are they treating them like criminals? They're with kids." But no one dared to step closer. Colonel Jackson finally exhaled slowly, glanced down at his watch, the faint glow of the numbers reflecting off his calm eyes. "Right on time," he murmured under his breath. Then, "Louder for the officers to hear. Stand down before this gets complicated." The shorter cop stepped closer, his voice rising. "You giving us orders now? You think you can threaten us?" He smirked coldly. "Guess what, buddy? You're not the one with the badge here." Father didn't flinch. His hand slowly went to his pocket again, deliberate, slow enough not to trigger them. The taller officer shouted immediately, "Hands out of your pocket now." Colonel Jackson's voice stayed calm. "I'm calling someone. For your sake, you'll want me to." The shorter cop's hand gripped his holster tighter. "You move one more inch," and before he could finish, the faint hum in the sky grew louder. This time, everyone heard it clearly. The mother turned, eyes widening as she looked up. The boy whispered, "Daddy, what's that sound?" Father crouched slightly, putting a hand on his son's shoulder. "That, son, is the sound of help." The taller cop turned, his head snapping upward toward the sound. His confident voice faltered for the first time. "What the hell is that?" The shorter cop, his hand still on his weapon, muttered under his breath, "Is that a helicopter?" The hum grew into a roar as a large, dark helicopter appeared against the fading evening sky. Its rotors chopped the air, kicking up dust and loose paper from the ground. The people recording gasped, some stepping back. "Is that military?" Someone whispered. Colonel Jackson straightened to his full height, his voice calm but commanding now. "They're here." The officers exchanged nervous glances. For the first time since they arrived, they looked unsure. The taller one tried to keep his voice steady. "Who, exactly?" "Did you just call, sir?" Colonel Jackson finally looked at him directly, his voice quiet but sharp. "You'll find out in about 30 seconds." The helicopter descended lower, its landing lights sweeping across the lot like giant search beams. Gosh. Cars rattled from the wind. The mother pulled the kids closer, shielding their faces from the gusts. The crowd could barely keep their cameras steady now. But no one stopped recording, as the helicopter began to hover just above the ground. The parking lot filled with the sound of boots hitting pavement. 4 soldiers in dark uniforms stepped out, each one moving with sharp precision. Their boots made a single heavy sound as they approached. One of them carried a secure tablet, another had a headset pressed to his ear. They didn't even look at the officers. They went straight to the father. The lead soldier, a captain, stopped in front of him and saluted sharply. "Colonel Jackson, sir. Apologies for the delay. Are you and your family unharmed?" The crowd gasped in unison. Even the mother looked at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. The kids blinked in awe, staring at the soldiers. The 2 police officers stood frozen, their faces pale. The taller one opened his mouth, but no words came out. The shorter one muttered under his breath, "Colonel." Colonel Jackson finally lowered his hands. He placed one on his son's shoulder and one on his daughter's, his calm expression never changing. "We're fine. But these officers may need some explaining to do." The captain turned sharply, his eyes locking on the 2 stunned officers. "Names and badge numbers now." The taller cop stammered. We were just doing our job." The captain cut him off coldly. "You detained a decorated officer and his family without cause. You escalated without justification. And now, you're going to explain that to his superiors." The shorter officer swallowed hard, his hand dropping from his holster completely. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, began murmuring louder. Phones were still up, catching every second. Colonel Jackson crouched slightly, whispering to his kids, "It's okay now. We're safe." The boy whispered back, eyes wide, "Daddy, are you really a colonel?" Jackson smiled softly. "Yes, son, but right now, I'm just your dad. I'm taking you home." The captain stepped closer, his voice low but respectful. Colonel, your transport is ready. Orders from HQ. We'll escort your family home immediately. Taller officer finally found his voice. Sir, we didn't know who you were. His tone was a mix of fear and desperation. Colonel Jackson straightened, his calm eyes finally locking on the officer. That's the problem. Treat people with respect because of who they are. You treat them with respect because it's the right thing to do. The officer swallowed, his face burning under the flashing red-blue lights. The shorter one muttered something, but his voice was lost under the roar of the helicopter as its rotors spun up again. Colonel Jackson placed a protective arm around his wife's shoulders. The soldiers flanked the family as they walked toward the helicopter, the crowd parting silently. Phones followed their every step, capturing the unbelievable moment. The two officers just stood there, their faces pale, watching as the man they had tried to humiliate boarded a military helicopter with his family, saluted and escorted like the hero he truly was. And for the first time all night, the parking lot was silent, except for the thundering sound of the chopper lifting off. Into the darkening sky, the helicopter's thundering blades faded into the distance. The dust settled back to the pavement. But the tension in the parking lot didn't disappear. The family stood still beside their car. Colonel Jackson placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The boy was shaking, his face pale. The little girl's eyes were red from crying, her tiny hands gripping her mother's coat tightly. The mother crouched, brushing her daughter's tears away. It's okay, baby. It's over now, she whispered softly, but even her voice trembled. Her eyes darted back toward the two police officers who still stood frozen by their car, looking like statues, unsure what to do next. The taller officer finally muttered, almost to himself, We didn't know, we were just following protocol. The shorter officer shot him a sharp glance, whispering quickly, Shut up. The crowd's still recording, and they were. Dozens of phones pointed their way, capturing every word, every twitch, every uneasy glance. People watching weren't leaving. They were waiting. Some whispered, Did you hear that? He's a colonel? Yeah, they treated him like trash until they found out. Figures. This is going viral tonight. Colonel Jackson bent down so he was eye level with his kids. His deep, calm voice softened. Look at me, both of you. The boy hesitated before meeting his father's eyes. The little girl peeked up, still sniffling. You're safe, Jackson said firmly, his voice steady like a rock. No one is going to hurt you. Not while I'm here. Do you trust me? Both children nodded, their small heads bobbing slowly. The boy whispered, But Daddy, why were they so mean? We didn't do anything. Jackson's eyes softened. No, and sometimes people don't need a reason. Sometimes they judge before they know who you are. But that's why you always stay calm. You never let them scare you. The mother stood, watching her husband carefully. He was calm, too calm. It was the same calm she had seen in him years ago, before he left for a mission overseas, when he told her goodbye with the same quiet confidence. It was the kind of calm that came from experience. Empowered, she finally asked, her voice low. Michael, are we leaving, or are you waiting for someone? Jackson checked his watch again. They'll be here any second, he said simply. His tone was so sure, so certain, it almost sounded rehearsed. The mother frowned slightly. That day. Before Jackson could answer, a voice boomed across the parking lot. Colonel Jackson? Shh. Everyone turned. A black SUV rolled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the dim evening light. The vehicle stopped abruptly, and two more uniformed military officers stepped out. They moved quickly, their posture straight and disciplined, scanning the area as if assessing for threats. The taller of the two approached, his boots clicking sharply against the pavement. Sir, we received your distress signal. Are you and your family unharmed? The two police officers stiffened, eyes widening even further. They exchanged a silent glance, both realizing this was far beyond anything they were prepared for. Colonel Jackson nodded once. We're fine. Physically. But this, he said, motioning toward the officers with a subtle tilt of his head, needs to be documented. The taller military officer's expression didn't change. Yes, sir. We'll take full statements and file the incident report directly to command. The shorter police officer finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly. Sir, Colonel. Listen. Jackson turned his gaze on him, sharp and unflinching. Not another word. Not until I'm finished. The officer froze mid-sentence, his mouth snapping shut. The crowd whispered louder now, the tension buzzing like static in the air. Phones zoomed in. Some people were whispering about posting it online already. Others were just stunned silent, watching the scene unfold like something out of a movie. The mother finally spoke up, her voice firmer now. Michael, we just want to go home. The kids, they've had enough for tonight. Jackson looked at her for a moment, his eyes softening again. Then he nodded slowly. Yes, we're going home. But first, he turned back to the taller military officer. Escort my family to the vehicle. I'll meet you there in a moment. The officer nodded. Yes, sir. He gently gestured for the mother and kids to follow him, his presence calm and protective. The boy looked back at his father nervously, but Jackson gave him a small, reassuring nod. As they walked away, Jackson turned back to the two police officers. The flashing lights from their cruisers reflected in his steady eyes. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. But his words cut through the air like a blade. You drew weapons. You screamed orders. You humiliated my family. All because of what? A vague call about suspicious people? Or because you saw a black family in a nice neighborhood? Taller officer swallowed hard. Sir, we didn't mean. Jackson's voice grew colder, though it never rose above normal volume. No, you didn't think. And now, every second of this is on camera. He glanced briefly at the crowd, dozens of phones pointed at them, recording every word. This doesn't end here. Not for you, not for me. The shorter officer shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Jackson took a single step closer, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the pair. I suggest you prepare your reports very carefully, because when I file mine, your careers will depend on the truth. Neither officer responded. Neither dared to. Jackson turned on his heel, his boots crunching softly against the gravel as he walked toward the waiting SUV, where his wife and kids sat safely inside. The taller military officer opened the door for him, saluting as he approached. Jackson paused for a moment, glancing back at the parking lot. The crowd was still there, still watching. The two officers were still standing by their cars, looking, like they wanted to vanish into the asphalt. Then he climbed into the SUV, the door shutting with a heavy thud. The engine roared to life. As the vehicle pulled away, the crowd began to disperse slowly. Murmuring to each other about what they had just witnessed, the two police officers stood in the fading light, the red and blue flashes now feeling like a spotlight of shame. One of them finally whispered, "We're in trouble." And he was right. The black SUV carried Colonel Jackson's family down the quiet street, its tinted windows shielding the shaken children from curious eyes. But back in the parking lot, the tension still clung to the air like a heavy fog. The two police officers stood near their cruisers, their radios silent, their faces pale in the glow of their own flashing lights. The taller one finally broke the silence, his voice a whisper. Just happened to us. The shorter one shot him a sharp glance. What do you think? We just detained a colonel. A real one. Military brass. And we did it in front of a whole crowd with cameras rolling. His voice was low, but laced with anger. We're dead. Career's over. Before the taller one could answer, one of the bystanders stepped closer. A man in his late 30s, phone still recording, his voice dripping with disbelief. You two really thought a man walking his kids to a car was suspicious. You screamed at his wife, scared his children. And for what? A fake tip? Or your own bias? The taller officer stiffened. Sir, step back. This doesn't involve you. The man raised an eyebrow, unfazed. Oh, it doesn't. Because from where I'm standing, it involves everyone who saw you to abuse your power tonight. He gestured toward the small crowd still lingering with phones raised. Do you see them leaving, or do you see them uploading? The officers glanced nervously at the people surrounding them. Some whispered, this video's going viral tonight, they're done. totally done. Others just stared, their faces a mix of disgust and quiet satisfaction. The shorter officer tried to regain control, his voice firm but shaky. "We got a report. Anonymous tip about suspicious activity near the restaurant," we responded, just like we're trained to. The bystanders scoffed. "And what did that report actually say? Black family walking while existing? That's your excuse?" The taller officer's face turned red, his jaw tightening. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't not when dozens of phones were pointed at him, capturing every second. Before he could speak, the distant sound of engines echoed again. Not the roar of helicopters this time, just the steady, powerful hum of more vehicles approaching. The crowd turned as 3 more black SUVs rolled into the lot, each stopping in precise formation. The first door opened, and out stepped a man in a dark suit, broad shoulders, sharp eyes, an air of authority that made even the remaining bystanders instinctively step back. He didn't shout, didn't need to. His presence commanded silence. He walked straight up to the 2 officers, his polished shoes clicking softly on the pavement. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. "Officers, you just detained a decorated military officer and his family. You did it without cause, without evidence, and in front of dozens of witnesses." The shorter cop swallowed hard. "Sir, we acted on a tip." The man in the suit raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "I've already seen the footage. A cue received it minutes ago." "Do you know what's worse than your actions tonight?" He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "The fact that every second of it is now online. Every second." The taller officer's mouth went dry. He had seen careers end over far less. He had seen reputations burn because of one bad call. And now, this wasn't just a bad call. It was a nightmare. The man in the suit stepped back slightly, glancing toward the crowd. His sharp gaze swept over the bystanders, many of whom instinctively lowered their phones not because they had to, but because his silent authority felt heavy. Then he looked back at the officers. "Colonel Jackson chose not to press criminal charges tonight, but don't mistake that for mercy. Your precinct will be hearing from his command. Trust me, your badges, your records, your future in this department. They're all hanging by a thread." The shorter cop opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The taller one whispered, barely audible, We didn't know who he was." The man in the suit's expression didn't change. "That's the point. Shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. You wear a badge to serve, not to judge." The taller officer's shoulders sagged. The shorter one clenched his fists at his sides, his jaw tight, but his eyes avoiding the man's gaze. The man in the suit finally turned away. "Go home. Of you, you'll be contacted by Internal Affairs within 24 hours. Pray they're kinder to you than you were to that family." He walked back to the SUVs, his presence lingering even after he left. The engines roared, and the convoy disappeared down the street, leaving behind only the flashing lights of 2 police cruisers, 2 men whose careers were now teetering on the edge of ruin. The crowd slowly began to leave, murmuring among themselves. Some were still filming, others were already typing furiously into their phones, no doubt posting everything they had just witnessed. A few shook their heads, muttering about how things like this always happened. The taller officer finally broke the heavy silence, his voice low. "This is going to destroy us." The shorter one didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on the dark horizon where the SUVs had vanished. "It already has." The black SUV carrying Colonel Jackson's family moved steadily down the road, its tinted windows shielding the shaken faces inside. The 2 kids sat silently, clutching their mother's hands on either side of her. The boy stared out the window, watching the city lights blur by. The little girl leaned her head against her mother's arm, her eyes heavy from tears and exhaustion. The mother looked across the seat at Jackson. He sat straight, his expression calm, his eyes fixed ahead. It wasn't the calm of someone who was relieved. It was the calm of someone who was waiting. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Michael, what was that? The helicopter, the soldiers, the suit who showed up after. What aren't you telling me?" Jackson's eyes didn't move from the road ahead. "They were my people," he said simply. "Or, they used to be. I called them to make sure we got out safe." The mother frowned. "I get that. But the way they treated you," salute, the escort, even that man in the suit. "You weren't just a colonel, were you?" Jackson's lips pressed together for a moment. He didn't answer right away. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and the faint breathing of their kids. Finally, he said quietly, "I held more than one title in my time." "Colonel was?" "One, the other. Let's just say it carried weight far beyond the uniform." The mother's eyes narrowed. "Michael, are you saying those men didn't just come because you called? They came because they were ordered to?" Jackson finally turned to look at her. His eyes were calm, but there was something in them, something she hadn't seen in years. A depth, a shadow. The same look he had when he came back from deployments, carrying stories he could never tell. "They came," he said softly, "because I still outrank most people in that chain of command, even without wearing the uniform." The mother's breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet realization that her husband was far more than he let on. Before she could respond, the SUV slowed. Jackson looked out the window, his eyes scanning the dark street. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. The street lamps flickered. Softly, casting long shadows across the road, he spoke to the driver, his tone suddenly sharper. "Why are we stopping?" The driver's voice was calm but low. "Sir, there's another vehicle blocking the road ahead. Unmarked, engine running. No lights." Jackson's hand immediately went to the door handle, turned to his wife. "Keep the kids low. Don't move until I say." The mother's eyes widened. "What's happening?" Jackson opened his door slowly, stepping out into the cool night air. The sound of his boots hitting the pavement echoed in the quiet. He walked forward, his tall frame steady, his eyes narrowing at the black sedan parked across the road. The driver's side window of the sedan rolled down halfway. A man's voice, deep and smooth, cut through the night. "Colonel Jackson." Jackson stopped a few feet away, his hands loose at his sides. His voice stayed calm. "Who are you?" The man in the sedan chuckled softly. "Someone who's been watching you for a long time. Tonight's little display got a lot of attention. The kind of attention people like us don't want." Jackson's jaw tightened. "People like us." The man leaned forward slightly, his face still mostly hidden in shadow. "Retired, decorated, and holding secrets the world isn't ready for. Secrets some people might kill for, if they knew you still had access." Jackson didn't move, didn't blink, but his voice lowered, firm and controlled. "If you're here to threaten me or my family, you should rethink your plan, because the last men who tried that didn't leave standing." The man in the sedan didn't flinch. Instead, he smirked faintly. "Oh, I'm not here to hurt you, Colonel. I'm here to remind you. The world hasn't forgotten who you really are. Neither have the people who once worked under you." Before Jackson could respond, the sedan's engine roared. The vehicle backed up, spun, and vanished into the night without another word. Jackson stood in the middle of the road. For a long moment, his jaw tight, his mind racing. Then, slowly, he walked back to the SUV. The mother's anxious eyes met his as soon as he opened the door. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice low. Jackson slid back into his seat, his expression unreadable. "Someone from a past, I thought. Was done, but apparently. Tonight reminded a few people I still exist." He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The SUV started moving again, rolling silently through the quiet streets. But Jackson's calmness wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't the calm of a man who had control. It was the calm of a man preparing for something much bigger, something he hadn't wanted to face again, and as the lights of their neighborhood came into view, whispered softly to himself, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The SUV pulled into the quiet neighborhood, its headlights sweeping across rows of sleeping houses. The kids had finally dozed off, their heads resting against their mother's shoulders. The hum of the engine was the only sound, but inside the vehicle, no one felt at peace, not even for a second. The The mother glanced at Jackson, sat stiffly, his gaze fixed out the window. His jaw was tight, his hand tapping once against his leg, a habit she hadn't seen in years. She whispered softly so the kids wouldn't wake. "Michael, tell me what's going on. That car, that man. You didn't even look surprised to see him." Jackson's eyes didn't move from the dark streets passing by. "I wasn't surprised," he admitted. "I knew something like this could happen the moment I made that call earlier. Those men, the soldiers, they aren't the only ones who get alerts when my name comes up." The mother's breath caught. "You're saying, whoever that was, they've been tracking you?" Jackson finally turned to meet her eyes. "Not tracking, waiting. Some people I used to work with, they don't forget faces or favors. When I stepped out of the military, I thought I left that all behind, but tonight reminded them I'm still out here." The mother's hand tightened protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "And now they know where we live." Jackson's gaze softened as he looked at her. They already knew. If they wanted to hurt us, they would have. But they want something else, something only I can give. The SUV slowed as it turned into their driveway. The porch light flickered faintly, casting long shadows across their front yard. Everything looked normal, too normal. Jackson's instincts screamed. He put a hand on the driver's shoulder. "Keep the engine running." The driver nodded silently. Jackson turned to his wife, his voice low but calm. "Take the kids inside. Lock every door. Don't open them for anyone unless I say—" The mother hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "Michael, what's happening?" Jackson gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Nothing I can't handle, but I need you and the kids safe. Go." The mother, still unsure but trusting his calm, carried the sleepy children inside. Jackson waited until the front door closed and locked before he stepped out of the SUV. The cool night air was silent, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt watched. Jackson's boots crunched softly on the gravel as he scanned the street. The flickering porch light buzzed faintly, its glow casting uneasy shadows. Then he saw it. Across the street, parked just far enough to blend into the dark, was another vehicle. Different from the sedan from earlier, but similar, marked windows tinted. The faint glow of a cigarette ember flickered inside. Jackson's voice was calm but firm as he spoke toward the shadowy car. "You can stop hiding, if you wanted. Me dead, you'd have tried already." The cigarette ember glowed once, then faded. A car door opened with a soft click. A figure stepped out, a tall man in a dark coat, his face shadowed by the dim streetlight. He didn't raise his hands, didn't move quickly. He just walked forward slowly, his boots crunching against the pavement. When he was close enough, his voice finally broke the silence. "Colonel Jackson," still sharp as ever. "It's been a long time." Jackson studied him carefully, his expression giving nothing away. "Who sent you?" The man smirked faintly. "No one. Not yet. But after tonight, after what you pulled in that parking lot, the people upstairs are going to start asking questions. And when they do, they'll send people a lot less friendly than me." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Friendly? You park outside my house at night, smoke like a beacon, and call yourself friendly?" The man chuckled softly. "Let's just say I'm the only one tonight who isn't here to drag you back in." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Back in?" The man tilted his head slightly. "You know what I mean? They don't just forget assets. Like you can walk away, sure. But when the world gets messy, and it's about to get very messy, they come knocking." Jackson stayed silent for a long moment. Then he asked, his voice low and measured, "What do they want from me?" The man's faint smile disappeared. "Not yet, but soon." "And when they do, you'll either help them, or you'll spend the rest of your life trying to protect that family inside." He nodded toward Jackson's house, where the faint outline of his wife could be seen through the curtain, holding their kids close. Jackson's hand twitched slightly, but he stayed still. His voice was ice. "If you or anyone you work for threatens my family, there won't be a place on this earth you can hide." The man didn't flinch. In fact, he smiled again coldly. "That's the Jackson I remember. Always calm. Always dangerous." He stepped back toward his car, his cigarette ember flaring briefly again. "Get some sleep, Colonel. You'll need it." The car door shut with a quiet thud. The engine purred to life, and the unmarked vehicle rolled slowly down the street, vanishing into the shadows. Jackson stood in the middle of the street for a moment, his eyes scanning the empty road, his breath steady but heavy. Then he turned back toward his house, a flickering porch light buzzing faintly as he approached. Inside, his wife was waiting by the door, her eyes wide with questions. But before she could speak, Jackson said quietly, "They're not done with us yet, not by a long shot." The house was quiet. It's too quiet. The kids had been tucked into bed, their small faces finally calm after a long, terrifying night. The mother sat at the edge of the couch, her hands gripping a mug of untouched tea, her eyes fixed on her husband. Jackson stood by the living room window, the curtains drawn halfway. The flickering porch light outside cast a faint glow across, his face highlighting the calm tension in his features. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't speaking. He was just listening. The mother's voice finally broke the silence, low but edged with fear. "Michael, are we safe here? Or should we pack the kids and leave tonight?" Didn't turn from the window. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it. "If we run, they'll find us faster. We stay, at least we can control the ground we're standing on." The mother's brow furrowed. You keep saying they? Who exactly? Are they Michael, that man in the sedan? The one who came earlier? Or someone else?" Jackson finally turned, his deep eyes meeting hers. "There are always layers. Some people just watch. Others pull the strings, and some, they only show up when things are about to change in a way no one can ignore." Before the mother could respond, a faint noise drifted through the house. A creak. Soft. Barely audible. But enough for Jackson to freeze mid-sentence. His hand instinctively went to the drawer under the coffee table. He pulled it open silently, retrieving a compact black pistol, the kind that didn't make a sound unless it needed to. The mother's breath caught. "Michael," he raised a hand gently, signaling for silence. His head tilted slightly, listening. The noise came again, not from the front door. From the back of the house, Jackson moved quietly, his boots making no sound against the wooden floor. He gestured for his wife to stay put and keep the phone ready. Her trembling hands gripped the device as she watched him vanish into the dark hallway. The creak came again, this time from the back window in the kitchen. A faint shadow passed across the thin curtains. Someone was outside, watching or trying to get in. Jackson moved to the side of the window, his back against the wall, his breathing steady and controlled. He risked a quick glance through the edge of the curtain. At first he saw nothing. Then, in the dim glow of the porch light reflecting faintly off the glass, he caught the outline of a figure crouching low near the bushes. Dark clothes, face hidden by a hood. A gloved hand slowly reaching toward the window latch. Jackson didn't hesitate. He tapped the glass lightly, just once. The figure froze. Then, before the intruder could react, Jackson yanked the curtain aside, his pistol aimed directly at the shadow. His voice cut through the night, low but sharp. "Stand up slowly. Hands where I can see them." The figure hesitated, then slowly rose to their feet. The hood fell back slightly, revealing a pale, nervous face, a young man barely out of his 20s. His hands trembled in the dim light. Jackson's eyes narrowed. "You've got 10 seconds to tell me who sent you, or you won't like what happens next." The man stammered, his voice shaky. "Unknown one sent me. I was just checking the house." I thought Jackson's tone didn't change. "Lying to me is a mistake." "Who sent you?" The man's breath came faster now, his eyes darting toward the street as if looking for backup. Finally, his voice cracked. They said just to watch, not to hurt anyone, just to see if you were still the same Jackson everyone remembers." Jackson's grip tightened on the pistol, but he didn't lower it. "Who is they?" The man swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear. "They didn't tell me names, just that more people would be coming, and they don't. They don't watch, they act."
Wow.
Before Jackson could ask more, a pair of headlights flared down the street. Another unmarked car, creeping slowly, its engine humming softly like a predator circling prey. Jackson's voice dropped to a deadly calm. "Get out of here now, before I change my mind about letting you walk away." The man didn't argue. He bolted into the shadows, disappearing behind the trees as the approaching car drew closer. Jackson closed the curtain, locking the window firmly. He turned back toward the living room, where his wife now stood in the doorway, her face pale, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. She whispered, barely audible, "Michael, how deep does this go?" Jackson looked at her for a long moment. His voice was quiet, but heavy with truth. "Deeper than I ever wanted to bring home, and it's not stopping tonight." Outside, the slow-moving car parked at the end of the street, its lights shutting off one by one, leaving only darkness and silence. But Jackson knew better. Darkness didn't mean safety. It meant the real game was about to begin. The street outside was silent now, but Jackson didn't relax. He stood by the window, the curtains closed, watching the faint glow of the unmarked car at the end of the road. It hadn't moved, not an inch. Inside, the mother sat on the couch, clutching her phone. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear. Alone, but from the sheer weight of everything that had happened tonight. Her children were upstairs, finally asleep again, but she knew that sleep wouldn't last. Not with this tension creeping through the walls like smoke. She looked at her husband. He was still as a statue, his tall frame a shadow in the dimly lit living room. The only light came from the flickering porch bulb outside, buzzing softly, casting uneven shadows across his face. "Michael," she said softly, careful not to wake the kids. "We need to call someone, the police. Anyone. This isn't normal." Jackson finally turned to look at her. His expression didn't change, but his voice was steady. "No, the police can't help us. If anything, they'll make it worse. Those cars outside aren't here because of some crime. They're here because of me." The mother's throat tightened. "Then who can help us?" Before Jackson could answer, his phone buzzed softly in his pocket. Not the usual ringtone, not his personal line. This tone was different, sharp, urgent, a sound she hadn't heard before. Jackson pulled the device out slowly. The screen was blank, except for 2 words: "Private call." He accepted it without hesitation, lifting it to his ear. He didn't speak first. He just listened. A deep, smooth voice came through the line. "Colonel Jackson, it's been a while." Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled softly, a sound that felt both calm and dangerous. "Someone who warned you years ago that leaving wasn't going to be that simple. And tonight, you reminded everyone why they should never forget your name." Jackson stayed silent, his fingers tightening slightly around the phone. The voice continued. "You made a mistake, Jackson. That stunt with the chopper, the soldiers, the SUVs. You just lit up every radar that had gone quiet since you walked away. Now they all want to know, are you back in the game? Or should they take you out before you can be?" Jackson's voice stayed calm, low, and firm. "Not back in anything. I was protecting my family. That's all." The voice paused for a moment, then spoke again, slower this time. "Protecting your family is good. But you should understand something. The people watching you tonight aren't interested in good. They're interested in control, and they don't like variables." Jackson's jaw tightened. "I'm not a variable. I'm retired. Leave us alone." The voice chuckled again, colder now. "Oh, Jackson, you don't get to choose anymore. You walked away with too many secrets. And if they think you might talk, correct, they'll come for you. For all of you." Jackson's eyes flicked toward the window. The unmarked car was still there, unmoving, watching. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "If anyone touches my family, there won't be a safe place left for them to hide. You know that?" The voice didn't laugh this time. Instead, it said quietly, "That's exactly why they're scared of you. But fear doesn't make people back down. It makes them strike first." The line went dead. No goodbye, no warning tone. Just silence. Jackson lowered the phone slowly. The mother's eyes were wide as she stood from the couch, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who was that?" Jackson slid the phone back into his pocket, his expression unchanged. Someone who knows too much. And someone who just confirmed. This isn't about tonight anymore. It's about what's coming next. Before she could ask anything else, the faint hum of the unmarked car outside grew louder. Its engine revved softly, then cut out completely. The street went dark as its lights shut off. Jackson moved closer to the window, peeking through a sliver in the curtain. The car door opened, just enough for a shadow to step out. Tall, broad-shouldered, slow. Deliberate movements like someone who wasn't afraid of being seen. Jackson muttered under his breath. They're not just watching anymore. The mother's hand gripped his arm. What do we do? Jackson's eyes stayed on the shadow outside. His voice was low, calm but firm. We wait. If they're here to talk, we'll hear them out. If they're here to start something. He glanced at the pistol resting on the table beside him. Then we finish it before it reaches the kids. The shadow outside stopped at the edge of their yard, just under the flickering porch light. It didn't move closer, didn't call out. It just stood there, watching the house silently, as if waiting for Jackson to make the first move. And for the first time tonight, Jackson whispered something even his wife hadn't heard before, a name that made her heart skip a beat. Sent him. Ah. The figure stood in the yard, still as a statue under the flickering porch light. The shadows hid most of his face, but his presence was heavy to be just another watcher.
Jackson's eyes didn't leave him for a second.
Inside, the mother whispered, clutching Jackson's arm, Michael, who is he? Jaw tightened. His voice was low, calm, but laced with something she rarely heard from Himones. They call him Cain. He doesn't work for anyone, but everyone listens when he shows up. The mother's brow furrowed. Is he here too? Hurt us? Jackson shook his head slightly. If he wanted us dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Cain doesn't send warnings. He is the warning. Before she could reply, a faint knock echoed from the front door. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Not rushed, not loud. Just enough to echo through the house like a signal. Jackson glanced at the pistol on the table, then back at the door. He didn't grab the gun. Instead, he straightened his posture and walked to the entrance slowly, his boots making no sound on the hardwood floor. He stopped just short of the door and spoke, his deep voice calm but commanding. Cain, if you wanted to talk, you could have called. Why are you here? There was silence for a moment. Then a voice, deep and gravelly, came through the wood. Because they sent me to see if you're still the man you used to be. Jackson's eyes narrowed. If I'm not. The voice paused briefly, then replied, then they'll stop circling and start closing in. Tonight was the test, Jackson. You failed it by calling in the cavalry. Jackson let out a slow breath. I didn't fail. I protected my family. That's not a test. That's survival. Cain's voice didn't change tone. Survival is one thing. Attention is another. You drew every eye on you tonight. Now you're a problem they can't ignore. The mother, standing a few feet away, could barely hear the words. But the tension in Jackson's stance told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a threat she could see. This was something older. Deeper, something tied to a past she never fully understood. Jackson finally spoke again. What do they want, Cain? There was a faint sound of movement outside, like Cain shifting his weight. They don't want anything yet, but they will. And when they do, they'll come with choices. None of them good. Jackson's voice grew firmer. Then tell them I'm not interested. Left that life behind for a reason. My family comes first now. Not their games, not their missions. For the first time, Cain's voice dropped to a near whisper. You think you get to choose? You walked away with files, codes, clearances they swore no one could take. As long as you have those. Don't get to disappear. If you don't hand them over, they'll stop asking nicely. The mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Jackson had never told her about files or codes. She suddenly realized she didn't know everything about the man she married. Jackson's jaw tightened, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe. I told them years ago, I destroyed everything when I left. I don't have what they think I do. Cain's voice was colder now. They don't believe you. And until they get what they want, they'll keep coming. It's not just with watchers, not just with cars on quiet streets. They'll escalate. And when they do, you'll wish tonight was the worst of it. Jackson stayed silent, his breathing slow. And even then, he said quietly, "Tell them if they touch my family, there won't be a place left for them to hide." There was no response this time. Just the faint sound of boots crunching on gravel as Kane turned and walked away from the porch. Through the small slit in the curtain, Jackson watched him return to the unmarked car. The door opened, closed. The engine purred to life, and the vehicle rolled silently down the street, its taillights vanishing into the dark. Jackson stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty road. Then he turned back toward the living room. The mother stood in the hallway, her face pale, her hands gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. She finally spoke, her voice shaky. "Michael, what have you done?" Jackson's eyes softened slightly as he walked toward her. "I did what I had to do years ago and tonight. But now it looks like the past isn't done with me." Mother shook her head slowly. "So what happens now? We wait for them to come again? Or do we run?" Jackson looked toward the staircase, where the faint sound of his children breathing could be heard upstairs. His jaw tightened again.
We...
"Don't run. Running only makes us pray. We prepare. Because if they're sending Kane, the next people won't knock before they come." Outside, the quiet street remained still, but Jackson knew better. The real danger wasn't the silence. It was what was moving in the dark, just out of sight. The house was silent again, but not peaceful. Jackson stood in the center of the living room, his broad shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the locked front door. Every sound in the night, every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside felt amplified. The mother sat on the edge of the couch, staring at him, her voice soft but sharp. "Michael, tell me the truth. What did you do? Take that makes these people so desperate to find you." Jackson's jaw tightened. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, in a calm, low tone, he said, "When I left the service, I walked away with information they didn't want anyone to have. Not for money, not for leverage, for safety. Because I knew one day someone would try to use it to start something the world wasn't ready for." The mother's eyes widened slightly. "Information? What kind of information?" Jackson's gaze moved to the darkened window, scanning the street as he spoke. "Locations, codes, lists of people who don't officially exist. They're wrong. Hands got hold of it. Entire cities could vanish without a single shot being fired." Her hand tightened on the armrest. "Michael, do you still have it?" Jackson turned to face her. His deep eyes locked onto hers, calm but unyielding. "No, at least not all of it. But they think I do. And until they're convinced, they'll keep sending people. First watchers, then threats, then killers. And Kane, he was just the warning." Jackson nodded once. "If Kane shows up, it means the clock is ticking. They won't wait much longer before making their move." He walked over to the cabinet near the hallway and unlocked a drawer. She hadn't seen him open in years. Inside were small, black cases sealed, military grade, each one marked with simple white stencils. He opened one carefully. Inside lay a sleek communication device, a sidearm, and a folded map marked with a red circle. The mother's eyes widened. "Kept all of this? Even after you left?" Jackson's voice stayed calm. "I hoped I'd never have to use it. If they're coming, I need to be ready. Not just for us, but for whoever they send next." Before she could reply, a faint noise came from upstairs. Not the creak of a settling house. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Jackson's hand went to the sidearm instantly. He signaled for his wife to stay quiet and moved toward the staircase, his boots silent on the floor. The sound stopped as he reached the first step. The upstairs hallway was dark. Only a sliver of moonlight slipping through the window. Then a shadow moved. Quick, silent, someone was already inside. Jackson didn't hesitate. He slipped up the stairs, his weapon raised, his movements precise and controlled. The mother stayed below, frozen, clutching the phone but not daring to speak. At the top of the stairs, Jackson turned the corner and saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway near his children's room. The intruder wore all black, a mask covering his face, his gloved hands holding something small and metallic. Jackson's voice was low, cold, and commanding. "Step away from that door. Now." The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just tilted his head slightly as if measuring Jackson. Then in one smooth motion, he raised a small device and pressed a button. A faint red light blinked on the hallway. Floor, a tracker. Jackson fired. One precise shot, hitting the wall just inches from the man's hand. Now the sound was deafening in the small space, but it did the job. The intruder froze, then slowly raised his hands. Jackson approached cautiously, his weapon steady. "Who sent you?" The man's voice was muffled by the mask, but steady. "You know who?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "Do they know you're inside my house?" The intruder didn't answer. Instead, his eyes darted toward the blinking red tracker on the floor. Jackson followed his gaze and realized what it meant. There. Not just watching anymore. Jackson muttered under his breath. "They're marking the house." In one swift motion, Jackson grabbed the tracker, smashed it under his boot, and pulled the intruder toward the stairs. He didn't kill him, not yet. But he made sure the man understood. If they send anyone else inside, they won't walk out alive. Tell them that. Jackson shoved the intruder toward the front door and kicked it open. The unmarked car that had been sitting at the end of the street was gone now, but Jackson knew it hadn't gone far. The man sprinted into the darkness, vanishing as quickly as he appeared. Jackson locked the door, his wife rushing toward him, her voice panicked. "Michael, what is happening? They're coming inside now." "What do we do?" Jackson's voice was firm, steady, unshaken. "We move. Tonight, before they decide to stop testing us and start erasing us." He glanced toward the stairs where his children slept, unaware of the danger creeping closer by the hour. Then he looked back at his wife, his tone final. "We're not running to hide. We're running to end this. Before it reaches them." Outside, the street remained empty and silent. But somewhere in the shadows, more engines were humming, waiting for the signal to close in. The house was quiet again, but the air felt heavy. Jackson stood in the middle of the living room, his sidearm still in hand, his eyes fixed on the stairs where his children slept. Every instinct in him screamed that they couldn't stay here not another hour, not another minute. The mother stood by the couch, her hands trembling as she clutched a small backpack. Her voice was low but urgent. "Michael, even go? If they're watching us here, won't they be watching everywhere?" Jackson zipped the black cases he had pulled from the drawer earlier, his movements sharp and precise. "They'll be watching, yes, but they won't be ready for where we're going. There's a place I set up years ago, a fallback in case the world ever came crashing down." The mother frowned. "A safe house?" Jackson shook his head once. "Not exactly. It's more than that. It's off the grid. And no one but me knows how to get there." Before she could ask more, Jackson moved to the window and peered through a small gap in the curtain. The street was still empty, but he didn't relax. The silence outside wasn't safety. It was the calm before another move. He turned back to his wife. "Wake the kids. Pack only what we need. Clothes, food, water. Everything else stays." She hesitated, her voice catching. "Michael, are we ever coming back?" Jackson didn't answer. His silence said enough. Minutes later, the two children were awake, their sleepy faces confused and frightened as their mother hurried them into jackets and shoes. Jackson moved through the house like a shadow, checking each exit, every window, every corner. He knew they were being watched. The question was whether the watchers would let them leave. As they gathered by the front door, Jackson knelt to meet his children's eyes. His voice was soft, steady, but serious. "We're going on a trip. You have to stay quiet and stay close to us no matter what happens. Can you do that?" The kids nodded nervously, clutching their mother's hands. Jackson stood, pulling a small earpiece from one of the black cases and fitting it into his ear. He tapped it once. A faint click responded, followed by silence. The line was secure. He whispered into the device. Shadow 3, confirmed status. A calm, professional voice replied. Standing by, Colonel. Eyes on the street. 2 vehicles. Circling, no immediate movement. Jackson's jaw tightened. Keep it that way. We're moving in 2 minutes. The mother's eyes widened. You called someone? Jackson met her gaze. Not soldiers. Old friends. People who owe me favors. And people I trust to watch our backs. He moved to the back door, unlocking it quietly. They wouldn't leave through the front, too exposed. Instead, they slipped out the back, their steps soft against the damp grass. The cold night air wrapping around them, the backyard was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Beyond the fence, a narrow alley stretched between rows of houses. Jackson led the way, his hand resting on the pistol at his side, his eyes scanning every shadow. Halfway down the alley, a faint sound caught his ear, the soft crunch of gravel behind them. He turned quickly, motioning for his family to freeze. In the dim light he saw it, a figure at the far end of the alley, standing still, watching. Jackson's voice was low, controlled. Keep walking, don't look back. The mother obeyed, guiding the children forward as Jackson kept his eyes locked on the shadow. The figure didn't move, didn't follow. Just stood there, a silent reminder that they weren't escaping unnoticed. At the end of the alley, a black SUV waited with its engine running. The same type that had escorted them earlier, but this one bore no markings, no lights. The rear door opened as they approached, and a man stepped out tall, dressed in plain clothes. But with the unmistakable presence of someone who'd seen his share of battles, he nodded once to Jackson. Colonel, we've got a route. Oh. No trackers, no tails for. Now, Jackson ushered his family into the SUV, sliding in last. The door shut, and the vehicle rolled away, its headlights off until they were blocks from the house. The city streets blurred past, empty and cold. Inside, the mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael, how long have you been planning this? This safe house? These people? You knew something like this would happen, didn't you? Jackson's gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead. I didn't know when, but I knew the day I walked away. It wouldn't last forever. The SUV turned off the main road, taking a series of side streets and back routes. Every turn was deliberate, every lane change calculated to avoid detection. The kids clung to their mother, small faces pale in the dim light. After nearly an hour of weaving through the city, they left the paved roads entirely. The SUV bumped along a narrow dirt path surrounded by tall trees that swallowed what little moonlight there was. Finally, the vehicle stopped. The driver turned to Jackson. This is as far as we can take you. The rest of the way, you'll need to go on foot. The mother looked out the window, her eyes widening. The forest around them was dense, the air thick with fog. On foot, with the kids? Jackson nodded once, calm as ever. They won't follow us in here. Not easily. That's the point. He opened the door and stepped into the cold night air, scanning the shadows between the trees.
Oh.
Then he turned back to his family, his voice firm. Stay close. We're almost there, but the hard part is just beginning. Somewhere behind them, far down the dirt road, the faint hum of another engine echoed through the night. They weren't alone in the woods, not anymore. The forest was silent, but not peaceful. The thick fog hung low, clinging to the ground like smoke. Every step Jackson and his family took made a faint crunch against the damp leaves. Each sound echoing too loudly in the still night. Jackson led the way, his pistol low but ready, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The mother followed close behind, holding the children's hands tightly, her breath visible in the cold air. No one spoke. Even the kids sensed that this wasn't a time for questions. The path was barely visible. It's just a narrow trail of flattened earth winding deeper into the woods. The fog swallowed the moonlight, making every shadow seem alive. Behind them, somewhere, far off, the faint hum of an engine still drifted through the trees. Whoever was following hadn't given up. Jackson stopped suddenly and raised a hand. The family froze. Up ahead, barely audible, came a new sound, the soft crack of a branch. Snapping under weight? Not far, maybe 30 feet. Jackson's voice was a whisper, calm but firm. Stay here. Stay quiet. He moved forward slowly, his steps silent, his weapon raised. The fog thickened as he neared the sound, the trees closing in like walls. Another branch snapped closer this time. Then, through the haze, a figure emerged. Not armed, not rushing, just standing. A tall man in a dark coat, his face hidden by the shadow of his hood. Jackson's voice was low, sharp. Step out where I can see you, slowly. The figure tilted his head slightly, then spoke in a calm, even tone. You're moving fast, Colonel, but not fast enough. Jackson's grip on his weapon tightened. I told Kane I'm not part of this anymore. Tell whoever sent you to stop wasting their time. The hooded man chuckled softly, the sound low and unsettling. They're not wasting time. They're buying it. And they've already decided you're coming back, one way or another. Jackson's eyes narrowed. And if I refuse... Figure's tone didn't change. Then you won't have a family to protect anymore. Before Jackson could reply, a faint metallic click echoed from behind him. Not from the hooded man, from the trees to the right. A second figure, camouflaged in dark gear, had emerged. A rifle trained in Jackson's direction. The hooded man spoke again, calm as ever. They didn't send me to kill you tonight. It's to remind you how easily they can find you. How easily. They can corner you, even here. Jackson didn't lower his weapon, but his stance shifted slightly, ready to react. His voice was cold. If this is a reminder, you've made your point. Now get out of my way before I make mine. The hooded man chuckled again, shaking his head slightly. Still the same Jackson, always thinking you hold the cards. Then, without warning, he stepped back into the fog and vanished. The rifleman did the same, disappearing into the mist as silently as they appeared. No gunfire. No fight. Just a message left hanging in the cold air. Jackson stood still for a moment, his ears straining for any sign they were circling back. Nothing, only the distant hum of the engine, still somewhere behind them. He returned to his family, his face unreadable. The mother's eyes were wide, her hands gripping the children even tighter. Michael, what was that? Why didn't they do anything? Jackson holstered his weapon and spoke in a calm, even voice. They didn't come to attack. Not yet. They came to remind me that they can reach us anywhere, even here. The mother's voice trembled. So what now? We keep walking and hope they let us. Jackson shook his head. They're not going to let us. They're waiting for me to make the next move. I won't give them the satisfaction. He reached into one of the black cases slung over his shoulder and pulled out a small, rectangular device with a single blinking light. The mother frowned. What's that? Jackson pressed a button on the side, and the light turned steady. A decoy. By the time they realize it's not us, we'll be long gone. He placed the device on the ground, activating a faint pulsing signal. Then he guided his family off the narrow trail, deeper into the trees, cutting a new path through the underbrush. Every step was careful, every sound measured. The fog swallowed them, hiding them from sight as the pulsing decoy light blinked faintly behind. An hour later, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a weathered, abandoned cabin, its windows boarded, its roof sagging slightly, but still standing strong. Jackson exhaled slowly, scanning the area before ushering his family inside. The interior was cold and dark, but stocked. Canned food, bottled water, and gear lined the shelves. Supplies Jackson had left here years ago, untouched until now. The children curled up on the old couch, exhausted. The mother sank onto a chair, her face pale in the dim light. Jackson stood by the window, his eyes scanning the fog-filled woods outside. For the first time tonight, he allowed himself a whisper, not to his wife, not to the kids, but to himself. There. Forcing my hand, this ends soon. One way or another. Outside, in the distance, Faint red lights flickered through the fog. Not headlights, drones, dozens of them, moving slowly, scanning the forest. The clock was running out. The cabin was dark, its old wooden walls groaning softly in the cold night air. Inside, the only light came from a single lantern Jackson had found in the supply shelf. The glow barely reached the corners of the room, leaving shadows to stretch and twist along the walls. Jackson stood by the window, peering through a crack in the boarded-up wood. The forest outside was thick with fog, but through the haze, faint. Red lights floated in slow, deliberate patterns. Not stars, not fireflies, drones. Dozens of them. All searching, the mother sat on the couch beside their two children, holding them close. Her voice was low, tense. "Michael, how did they find us?" You said no one knew about this place. Jackson didn't turn from the window. "They didn't find us yet. Not exactly. Yeah, the drones are scanning the forest. They're not looking for the cabin. They're looking for heat signatures, movement, anything that tells them we're here." The mother's grip on the children tightened. "And if they find us?" Jackson finally turned, his face calm but serious. "Then this cabin becomes a trap, and we don't let that happen." He moved to the corner of the room and opened another black case. Inside were small devices, metallic, circular, each with a blinking blue light. He began attaching them to the walls, one by one. The mother frowned. "What are those?" "Jammers," Jackson said simply. "They'll block the drone sensors, at least for a while. But once the jammers activate, the people controlling those drones will know someone's here. I'll come in person." The mother's eyes widened. "So either way, we're not safe." Jackson looked at her, his deep eyes steady. Safe isn't an option anymore. Prepared is all we can be. He finished setting the last jammer and activated the system. The blue lights turned solid, and outside several of the red drone lights flickered, then blinked out. The others hovered, confused, their scanners disrupted. For a moment, the forest was quiet again. Then, in the distance, a new sound cut through the fog, the low, rhythmic thump of helicopter blades. Faint, but growing louder. The mother's face went pale. "They're sending more?" Jackson grabbed a heavy duffel bag from the floor and slung it over his shoulder. "They're not scanning anymore. They're closing in." He looked to his wife and kids. "Upstairs. There's a crawl space in the attic. Stay there until I tell you it's safe. No matter what you hear, you don't come down." The mother hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. "Michael, what are you going to do?" Jackson's jaw tightened as he loaded his weapon and checked the window again. "What I have to. If they want to come here, they're not leaving empty-handed, but they're not taking us either." She wanted to argue, to beg him to just run, but one look at his face told her it wouldn't matter. Jackson wasn't just protecting them. He was making a stand. As the mother led the kids upstairs, Jackson moved to the center of the room and opened the duffel bag. Inside were more tools of his old life: smoke grenades, a compact rifle, and a headset. He fitted the earpiece into his ear and tapped it once. "Shadow 3. Report," he said quietly. A voice crackled back through static. "2 choppers inbound, 10 minutes out. Ground teams mobilizing 5 SUVs heading toward your sector." Jackson exhaled slowly. "Then we don't have long."
At.
The voice paused, then added, "Colonel, are you planning to hold or move?" Jackson glanced up at the ceiling where his family was hiding, then back toward the fog-filled woods outside. His voice was calm, steady, but final. "We hold, but not here." Grabbed a smoke grenade and moved to the back of the cabin. When the choppers got close, he'd draw them away, lead them deeper into the forest, far from his wife and kids. Far from anyone who couldn't fight back. The faint thump of the helicopters grew louder, joined now by the distant roar of engines. The red lights of the drones flickered through the fog like ghostly eyes, circling, scanning. Jackson whispered. To himself, "They want me back so badly. Let's see how badly they're willing to bleed for it." Outside, the first helicopter broke through the fog, its searchlight sweeping across the treetops, piercing the night. The ground trembled as the SUVs approached from the south. Their headlights off, but their engines rumbling low. Jackson pulled the pin on the smoke grenade, his eyes narrowing as the thick white cloud began to spread across the cabin's back. Door. His voice was low, calm, almost cold as he whispered into the headset. Shadow 3. Light it up. From somewhere deep in the forest, a series of small, distant pops echoed through the night. Not gunfire, charges, decoys, designed to pull the incoming teams in the wrong direction. Jackson stepped into the smoke, disappearing into the mist just as the first searchlight swept over the cabin. He was no longer waiting. He was hunting. The smoke from Jackson's grenade spread quickly, mixing with the natural fog that already blanketed the forest. The cabin disappeared behind him, swallowed by the haze. Each step he took was slow, deliberate, his boots barely making a sound on the damp earth above. The helicopters roared closer, their searchlights slicing through the night like white knives. The beams cut across the treetops, swinging side to side, hunting. Somewhere in the distance, the low growl of engines grew louder, SUVs crawling through the woods, their tires crunching twigs and leaves. Jackson crouched behind a fallen log and tapped his earpiece. Shadow 3. Report. The voice came. Back, calm and steady. Ground teams moving in from 3 angles. 7 hostiles on foot, closing fast. Choppers circling. You've got maybe 4 minutes before they converge on your position. Jackson exhaled slowly, his breath forming a faint cloud in the cold air. Good, let them come. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out 2 more smoke grenades and a compact rifle. His movements were precise, efficient muscle memory from years of operations he thought he'd left behind. He didn't want a firefight. Not here. With his family just a few hundred yards away in the cabin, he needed to pull the hunters away. Make them think he was running, when in truth, he was leading them into something far worse. The first set of boots crunched in the fog nearby. Jackson crouched low, his rifle at the ready, his breathing slow and steady. Through the mist, faint shapes moved, dark figures in tactical gear. Night vision goggles glowing faint green. Their voices were muffled, almost mechanical through their coms. Target near. Sweep west. He won't make it far. Jackson rolled. The smoke grenades across the ground in their direction. The hiss was faint, but enough to make them pause. Then the grenades erupted, a thick wall of smoke billowing upward. Blinding their vision, the soldiers raised their weapons, their goggles struggling to cut through the sudden whiteout. Before they could adjust, Jackson moved swift, silent. Slipping past them like a shadow as he vanished deeper into the forest, he whispered into his earpiece, Shadow 3 route. The voice replied instantly, East, 50 meters. There's a ravine steep drop, but they won't follow you. Directly. You can circle around and draw them out. Jackson turned east, his movements fluid, precise. Every footstep was measured, every sound avoided. Behind him, the tactical team stumbled through the fog, their scanners flickering as the jammers did. Their work. The thump of helicopter blades grew louder again as one searchlight cut through the smoke, slicing across the trees. Jackson dropped to the ground, pressing himself into the damp earth until the beam swung past. He knew their pattern, he knew their rhythm, and he knew how to make them overreach. As he neared the ravine, he crouched low and unzipped another pouch from his duffel bag. Inside were 2 small circular disc pressure charges, designed not to kill, but to make noise. He placed them carefully along the edge of the ravine, each one hidden beneath leaves. Then, he whispered, Shadow 3, trigger the decoys on my mark. We'll make them think I'm pinned. The voice replied calmly, ready when you are, Colonel. Jackson took one last look toward the direction of the cabin, making sure no lights or sounds betrayed its location. Then he stood, aimed his rifle into the air, and fired 3 sharp bursts. The gunfire echoed through the trees like thunder, loud and deliberate. Instantly the team shifted. Voices shouted through coms. Contact. East quadrant. Move. The helicopters banked toward the sound, their searchlights converging, flooding the trees with harsh white light. The ground teams charged through the fog, their boots pounding the earth, their rifles raised. As they reached the ravine, "Jackson," whispered Mark. The forest erupted with sound. Explosions cracked through the air as the pressure charges detonated, sending dirt and leaves flying, echoing like heavy gunfire. The tactical teams dove for cover, radios crackling in confusion. Jackson slipped away through the chaos, moving low and fast along a narrow animal trail that curved around the search zone. By the time the smoke cleared and the teams realized he wasn't there, he was already a quarter-mile away, heading back toward the cabin from the opposite side. As he ran, his earpiece crackled again. Shadow 3's voice came through, steady, but urgent, "Colonel. We've got a problem." One of the drones bypassed the jammers. "It's circling near the cabin. If they find your family." Jackson's pace quickened, his jaw tightening. "It won't keep eyes on it. I'm on my way." The fog seemed thicker now, the night colder. Every step brought him closer to the cabin and closer to whoever was hunting more than just him. Because Jackson knew something the teams didn't. He hadn't been hiding only information when he left his old life. There was one last card he hadn't played yet. And if they forced his hand tonight, the hunters would regret ever stepping into these woods. The forest swallowed every sound except the faint hum of a single drone. Its red light cut through the fog like a glowing eye, hovering above the treetops, circling. The cabin sat below, dark and silent, but not invisible anymore. Inside, the mother held her children close in the cramped attic crawlspace. The boards were cold, and every creak of the old house made the kids flinch. The youngest whispered, "Mom, is Dad coming?" "Back." She pressed a finger gently to his lips, her own voice trembling. "Yes, he's coming. Just be quiet, don't move." Below them, the faint sound of boots crunching on the dirt outside reached her ears. Not one pair, several, slow, deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't rushing. Waiting then. Came a faint voice, muffled but clear enough to understand. It came from a come outside, spoken in a cold, professional tone. "Cabin located. Thermal shows 3 signatures inside. 2 small, 1 adult. No target orders." There was a pause. Then another voice, deeper, replied through static. "Hold position. Do not engage until the colonel shows himself. He won't leave them behind. He'll come to you." The mother's breath caught in her throat. They weren't just watching. They were using her and the kids as bait. Suddenly, a soft crack sounded in the distance, not from the house. From the woods, a branch snapping under weight. The soldiers outside tensed, their heads turning toward the sound. Whisper came through their combs. Movement. West, tree line. Before anyone could react, a faint metallic click echoed, followed by a burst of static through their radios. Their earpieces hissed, their feeds went dead. The jammers Jackson had planted earlier were now active, scrambling their signals. The soldiers fumbled to switch channels. In that moment of confusion, a shadow moved through the fog, silent, fast, and deliberate. Jackson, he slipped from tree to tree, his rifle steady, his eyes locked on the glowing red light of the drone above. One sharp shot rang out. Crack. The drone sparked, spun in the air, and crashed into the trees with a burst of sparks. Its red light vanished into the mist. The soldiers spun toward the sound, weapons raised. But before they could pinpoint his position, another distraction erupted. From the east, deep in the woods, a second explosion rumbled one of Jackson's decoy charges. The soldiers, unsure of his location, split into 2 groups. Jackson took the opening. He moved low and fast, toward the cabin, slipping behind the patrol perimeter. Every motion was controlled, every step calculated. Through the fog, he saw the faint silhouette of the old cabin, its windows dark. He tapped his earpiece once. Shadow 3, status. The calm voice returned. 6 on the ground. 4 split toward the east, chasing the decoy. 2 left at the cabin. No visual on the choppers, they're circling wide. Jackson whispered back, "Keep their attention. I'm going in." He crouched low and moved along the side of the cabin. The 2 soldiers standing guard outside were scanning the trees, their rifles raised, their goggles glowing faint green in the mist. They weren't watching behind them. Jackson didn't fire, not yet. Instead, he pulled a small, palm-sized device from his belt-to-sound emitter. He placed it against the cabin's far wall and activated it. A sharp, high-pitched frequency emitted. Just barely audible. Both soldiers flinched, turning instinctively toward the sound. In that brief distraction, Jackson moved to swift strikes, precise and silent. Both soldiers dropped to the ground, unconscious. He slipped to the cabin's back door and unlocked it quietly, stepping inside without a sound. The interior was dark, the air heavy with the scent of dust and old wood. Upstairs, faint whispers of his children's breathing reached his ears. He exhaled softly, relieved they were safe for now, but the relief didn't last. From outside, the sound of the helicopters grew louder again. Searchlights began sweeping over the forest, cutting through the fog in long white arcs. The distant rumble of engines followed. The other teams were coming back. Jackson whispered into his earpiece, "They'll be on us in 2 minutes. Shadow 3. Light the net." The voice on the other end replied calmly, "Copy. Grid online in 60 seconds."
Jackson?
Moved quickly, securing the door and pulling the black cases closer. Inside were the last of his toolsy MP grenades, smoke canisters, and a folded transmitter. He glanced up toward the attic, speaking low, "Stay quiet. No matter what you hear, don't come down." The mother's voice, faint from above, trembled. "Michael, are you coming back up?" Jackson paused. His deep eyes met. The shadows above. "Not if I can help it. This ends tonight." Outside, the first searchlight cut across the cabin's roof, bathing it in harsh white light. The engines of the approaching SUVs rumbled closer, the ground trembling beneath their tires. And in the fog, silhouettes of armed figures began to reappear, closing in. Jackson tightened the strap on his rifle and whispered to himself, "Time to finish what they started." The cabin shook with the roar of engines. 5 SUVs rolled into the clearing, their black shapes cutting through the fog, headlights off, only faint glows from their dashboards. Above, 2 helicopters circled, their blades thundering, searchlights slicing through the night like swords. The hunters had found their prey. Inside, Jackson stood by the window, his rifle cradled tight, his face calm, unreadable. In the attic, above, his wife and children crouched in silence, clutching each other as the old boards creaked beneath their knees. Every second felt stretched, every sound magnified. Jackson tapped his earpiece. "Shadow 3. Is the net live?" The voice came back, calm and certain. "Grid is hot. They cross the perimeter. They lose everything. But you've got one shot, Colonel. After that, they'll adapt." Jackson glanced toward the line of SUVs creeping closer, their engines rumbling low. The soldiers fanned out, rifles raised, night vision goggles glowing faint green. The first helicopter lowered, its searchlight sweeping across the cabin, blinding in its intensity. Jackson whispered back, "Copy. Trigger on my mark." He knelt by the black case on the floor and pulled out 2 EMP grenades. His fingers worked, fast, calm, almost mechanical as he armed them. Then he moved to the back door, opening it just enough to slip into the mist. The night swallowed him instantly. The fog was so thick even the searchlights struggled to cut through it. But Jackson moved like he had done this 1,000 times before, silent. Invisible, every step placed with purpose. He crept along the tree line, circling behind the first group of soldiers as they advanced on the cabin. They didn't hear him. They didn't see him. All their focus was on the dark windows ahead. One soldier's voice came through his cum, faint but audible to Jackson. "Thermal scan shows only 3 signatures, female and 2 minors. No colonel orders." A deeper voice replied, steady and cold, "Push forward. He'll come for them, alive if possible, dead if not." Jackson's jaw tightened. He tapped his earpiece once. "Shadow 3. Mark." Instantly, a faint hum filled the clearing, a low-frequency pulse that vibrated through the ground. The SUV's lights flickered, then died. Their engines coughed and stalled, leaving them dead and silent. The soldiers' goggles blinked out. There comes hissing static, Confusion erupted. The soldiers looked around, weapons raised, suddenly blind in the fog. The helicopters wavered, their instruments flickering, searchlights stuttering. Jackson didn't waste a second. He pulled the pin on the first EMP grenade and rolled it toward the closest SUV. A burst of light and static exploded, frying every electronic device within 50 feet. One of the helicopters jerked, its searchlight blinking out as its systems faltered. Panic rippled through the teams. Without their tech, they were just shadows, in the fog, vulnerable, blind. Unsure where the threat was coming from, Jackson stepped from the mist, his rifle raised. He didn't shout. He didn't warn. He moved with silent precision, taking out 2 soldiers with controlled strikes, using the confusion to his advantage. Not killing, just disabling. Quick. Efficient. Another soldier stumbled through the fog, raising his weapon blindly. Jackson moved behind him in a flash, striking him. Down before he could fire a shot. But the chaos didn't last long. From the second helicopter, a spotlight roared back to life, systems rebooted, its beam cutting through the mist, locking onto Jackson. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker, cold and commanding. Colonel Michael Jackson, stand down. Your family will not be harmed if you surrender now. Jackson didn't flinch. He raised his rifle toward the helicopter, not to shoot it down, but to force it to keep distance. His voice, calm and firm, carried through the fog. You already made the mistake of coming for my family. There is no surrender. He tapped his earpiece again. Shadow 3. Last trigger. A deep rumbling sound rolled through the forest. Not from the helicopters, not from the SUVs. Explosives, buried along the outer perimeter, detonated in sequence. Trees collapsed across the road, blocking every exit. The clearing became a trap, not for Jackson, but for the men who came to take him. The soldiers froze as the echoes of the explosions faded. They weren't hunting anymore. They were surrounded. Jackson stepped into the open, the fog swirling around him, his silhouette lit by the faint, flickering searchlight. His voice was steady, cold, and final. You want me back in your Black Ops program? You want the codes? The intel? The man who used to make all your ghosts disappear? He took one deliberate step forward, his rifle low but ready. Then tell your commander this. The colonel is done taking orders. Anyone who comes for my family again won't make it out alive. Silence. The soldiers held their ground, tense but motionless. The helicopter hovered, its searchlight fixed on Jackson, but no one moved to fire. Then, after a long pause, the loudspeaker crackled again. Understood, Colonel? This isn't over. But for tonight, we're done. The helicopters pulled back, their blades thundering as they rose higher, their lights fading into the fog. The soldiers retreated to their dead SUVs, some dragging their unconscious comrades, others glancing back toward Jackson with wary, unsettled eyes. Within minutes, the clearing was empty again. The fog swallowed the last traces of engines and lights until there was only silence. Jackson lowered his rifle, his breathing steady but heavy. He turned toward the cabin, walking slowly, deliberately, until he reached the door. Inside, the attic hatch creaked open. His wife peered down, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. Michael, is it over? Jackson looked up, his deep eyes calm but hard. For tonight, but they'll be back. The children climbed down, clinging to their mother's side, there, small faces pale. Jackson knelt, meeting their eyes, his voice soft now. You're safe for now, but we can't stay here. The mother's voice wavered. Where do we go? Where can we possibly hide if they can find us anywhere? Jackson stood glancing toward the fog-filled forest beyond the window. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was certain. We don't hide, not anymore. If they want a war, they'll get one. But on my terms. He closed the black case, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the door. The mother followed, her voice low, trembling but steady. Michael, what are you going to do? Jackson paused at the threshold, staring into the misty darkness outside. Then, in a voice cold and resolute, he said, I'm going to remind them why they were afraid of me in the first place. and with that, he stepped into the fog, the faint glow of the lantern fading behind him as the night swallowed his silhouette. The forest was silent once more. But for the first time since the night began, the silence felt different. Not the calm before the storm, but the calm of a man who had just declared war.